That way we can send the recording out to the other people that aren't with us as yet. So I would like to welcome you all along today, and thank you so much for taking time out of your lunch break for joining us today. So before we start, I would like to acknowledge all of the lands in which we meet on today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And so I would love to introduce and welcome Megan Tranter to our webinar today. We're absolutely thrilled to have Megan here. In fact, it's a bit of a coup that we got you, I think, in your busy schedule, dialing in from America. So what I might do is actually hand over, Megan, for you to just give us a little bit of background on yourself so that people can hear from you direct.
Well, thank you so much. And hi, everyone. And hello to those who will be listening as well. Yeah, as Kristen mentioned, I am here over in the US. With my background, I've been working in health and safety for, I often don't know whether to tell people how long, but I will. It's been 31 years that I've been working as a health and safety professional. I spent the first 10 years of my career in Australia, and for the past 21 years, I've been over here in the US. And I'm currently dialing in from sunny Seattle. And I know everyone always thinks, rainy Seattle, but actually for 3 months of the year, we do have some sun. And so we currently have maybe another few weeks or perhaps a month or so of the end of summer going into fall or autumn over here. So I've worked in many different types of health and safety roles. I started as working for the Division of Workplace Health and Safety in Queensland. I've worked in the mining industry and as an academic. And then at a point in my career, I decided to get what I call the real job in inverted commas and moved into corporate type health and safety roles, most often in big companies. So the most recent roles that I've had have been pretty big roles. I was Amazon's first ever global EHS director, Environment, Health and Safety Director. I was PepsiCo's first ever global vice president of EHS. And most recently, I worked for Netflix, where I led a team of production safety managers. And you might think, production, what are you talking about? And what it actually is making the films and the TV shows that you get to see on Netflix. I was looking after a team based in the US and Canada. And then we had shows that traveled around the world as well. So that was probably the coolest job. I happen to think that was the coolest job. And I often tell a story that, if you ever want to know how to land um, Chris, Chris Hemsworth, I was trying to think which one, Chris Hemsworth on a moving train in the snow in Europe, ask someone in my former team and they'll let you know how they did it. Because actually, with that particular movie, they did actually land the team on the moving train, and it wasn't CGI or anything like that. It was totally real. So I'm delighted to be here today, giving the perspective from the corporate side, and certainly appreciate everyone's time here today.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to hit you up afterwards for two things. So Chris Hemsworth is my leave home pass. So that's one. And second of all, we're going to get his number. Only kidding. Thank you so much for joining us. And Sam, who is also with us again today, our fabulous co-founder of Human. So Sam, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
That's a very hard act to follow, Megan. That was fascinating background. And I am really curious to find out how you do drop a bunch of people on a moving train in the snow, but we'll take that offline. So my official title at Human is Chief Health Officer. I formerly was the founder and CEO of Human Psychology, which is Adelaide's largest provider of psychological services, which I sold to the APM Group 2 years ago and finished up in February and started the next day with Human with the fabulous Kristen and Martin. And prior to being a psychologist, I had marketing roles with Mattel Toys and The Body Shop, and also worked as a management consultant for the Boston Consulting Group. So I'm kind of a clinical psychologist and a business person combined together. So that's my background.
Awesome, thank you. And for those of you online, I'm also one of the co-founders of Human. I was kind of voluntold I was going to be the CEO. So
Mhm.
I wear the CEO hat and probably about 40 other hats at the minute, I think, with our business, which is just amazing, and we're loving every minute of it. No one day is the same. Background really actually is in finance and airlines. So I started in the commerce space, worked out pretty quickly that humans are actually the lead indicator of a business, not the financials. If you get the right humans in the right roles, loving what they do, the financials kind of semi take care of themselves. So went on to do a master's in human resources so that I could actually really immerse myself in the human part of every business. So yeah, Martin, Sam and I have teamed up to create an amazing business called Human, which we're out helping organisations and individuals in the psychosocial safety space. So thank you for joining us today. So what I am going to do is kick off with some questions, and because we have got an audience that's actually quite manageable, please feel free at any stage if you have a question to pop off mute and ask. This is an awesome opportunity for you to feel like you can play a part in asking questions because we've actually got such an intimate group today. It's fantastic. So first of all, what I thought I'd do is go to you, Sam, to talk a little bit about, obviously, we're covering off neuroscience and trust and why safe teams perform better. So really curious to understand what happens in the brain when a workplace feels unsafe, and how does that actually impact people's mental health?
All right, so I'm going to do a little neuroscience summary. So, in the brain architecture, there's a little tiny bit sort of at the back in the middle called the amygdala. And I want you to think of it as a switchboard. So, all of the information coming into your brain, the amygdala assigns a feeling tone, and its job is to detect threat. And it does so automatically, unconsciously, and super quickly. So if it's information coming in, if it thinks that it might be a threat, it scans all of your memory banks. If it finds something similar, it will jam on the fight, flight, freeze response. And this all needs to happen super, super quickly. So, a couple of microseconds. It takes our brain probably 8 to 10 seconds to register a positive experience coming in. So our brains are neurologically primed to detect threat and go to the negative. When the amygdala is activated and the fight flight kicks in, all sorts of physiological changes occur. So adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol get dumped into our bloodstreams. All sorts of physical changes happen, but unfortunately, also it pretty much shuts down our brain. So it shuts down connectivity to the prefrontal cortex, and we kind of lose our minds a bit. It also suppresses oxytocin, which is like the bonding neurotransmitter, so that degrades social bonds. And there's then a memory encoding bias. So there's another bit of the brain called the hippocampus, and it encodes negative events more strongly each time this happens. So we then tend to remember failure and criticism, and that fuels a defensiveness cycle. So basically, unsafe teams trigger threat circuits in the brain, and our brains don't differentiate between psychological threat and physical threat. So, someone raising their voice at you in a meeting is going to trigger the same threat response that would happen if you were being chased by a wild animal. So, that's the kind of summary of the neurobiology behind trust and safety in teams.
Wow, that's actually frightening, isn't it? Really, when you think about the serious impact that that can have, because we certainly see a lot of very unsafe teams in the work that we do often. Megan, this question is for you. You've obviously worked in some pretty amazing organizations like the Netflixes and the Amazons. How do high-performing organizations apply neuro leadership principles to actually build trust in these teams?
It's a really good question because I think every organization has a different culture, and a lot of that is born out of things like leadership principles or values or beliefs around the organization. And so one thing that I've observed, not necessarily in the places that I've worked, but sort of as a general observation, is that when people understand what it is about the organization and the culture, they can align themselves with those. And then they can decide, is this the right place for me? And is this a good place for me to align my own values with that of the company? There's another thing that's really interesting, though, I think, especially with high-performing teams. High-performing teams often are expected to have high levels of curiosity. You know, sometimes companies actually ask these high-performing teams to do things like dissent with one another. So they have this belief that if you have a differing point of view, then you should be able to bring that point of view to the table and have conversations about that. And, you know, some companies even have these leadership principles about openly disagreeing and tell you that you should be disagreeing with one another because the belief, again, is that when you bring different perspectives, then you ultimately result in a better result and have solid problem solving. And so, you know, what occurs to me a lot is with these companies that ask for this from their employees, that they're expecting the curiosity and they're expecting the disagreement and the dissent. And at the same time, they're expecting people to work together to solve often extremely difficult problems, often in highly complex organizations, in environments that are quickly changing, that the way to do that is to be able to have people feel comfortable with those interactions that they're having with one another. And then when you start seeing that not working so well, that's when you're seeing these decisions not being able to be made. Perhaps teams are paralyzed or they're not able to align on the goals that they want to set. And then when it comes to measuring the goals that they have, there's a lot of questions even about how they achieve the goals and whether they've achieved that success. So I know this links also to, you know, topics we've all heard about, psychological safety, you know, that sort of thing as well. But my experience with this is that the high performing teams do have that level of comfort with one another. And now after hearing Sam talk about the chemistry and the biology of it, I also was sitting here nodding my head saying, aha, that makes a lot of sense there.
Yeah, it really does. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I sort of look at it often through that kind of governance lens, being in the HR space, because we're constantly needing to do that. And I also sit on a couple of national boards in Australia. And, you know, as a board member, constantly needing to understand what we're looking at with our teams around the indicators that come up to us as executives and or board directors. And I think the fearful thing is that those organizations that have this real appetite for seeing all of the indicators on all of the reports being green are absolutely missing the mark when it comes to really understanding what's playing out for their people within their organizations. And in fact, we went into one business not that long ago, Sam and I, to do some work, and the board actually had a really low tolerance to seeing any kind of amber or red risk being reported up. And so what was happening was underneath, the staff knew that that was the case. And so they were fudging numbers to make things look like they were all really rosy. And in fact, it was a hot mess. And so, you know, we got to the point where we said we got brought in actually to do an incident investigation. And throughout that process, we uncovered that things were not anywhere near green. So we kind of refer to it at Human and other organisations as the watermelon effect. If everything looks beautiful and green on the outside, don't just assume that it is beautiful and green underneath. Watermelons are red in the middle. So start asking the questions. And that dissent piece is really interesting, Megan, because it kind of feeds nicely into that. You know, if you encourage a team to have that opportunity to feel safe to speak up, you will hear some of the risk that sits in your business and ignore it at your peril. Yeah.
Kristen, if I may add on, and I did see Michelle's hand up, but there was a little add on that I wanted to do with what you were saying. I remember once I had a boss and he said to me that he was expecting that I wasn't going to be achieving all of my goals. And so, you know, I'd set these goals, and I had previously come from an organization similar to what you were talking about, where you got green. And you always got green because it was linked to things like bonuses or promotions or other extrinsic awards, rewards as well. And I remember this boss said to me, "No, I'm expecting that you don't achieve at least 20% of your goals." I'm like, "What?" You know, thinking this was a trick, thinking like, how can you even think like this? And what I came to learn out from this guy was that he understood and expected that you needed to experiment enough. You needed to be courageous enough to have those really big swings for goals that you probably weren't going to achieve. Because even if you achieved half of them, then you're probably further ahead than if you'd chosen an easy goal like the green. But I remember just, you know, again, talking about the neuroscience and the relevance of this, when he said this to me, feeling really uncomfortable
Mm.
because I had this expectation always that in these companies you had to get green. And it was actually quite liberating, and it changed my leadership style with the way that I then led teams
Mm.
to encourage them also to take a few risks and throw out a few experiments so that they could have that flexibility to understand that learning from different situations was actually the expectation.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those people that are sitting in leadership roles, even if you've got a board that says they want to see the green, push back and ask more questions. Michelle, you had your hand up.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if we passed this moment now, but I just sort of wanted to clarify in my head. So the idea of having that conflict or dissent is good for innovation and creativity and to push boundaries like that. But then going back to Sam's slide before of that triggering that or the amygdala, the stress response and that sort of things. But it's about a way of fostering an environment that makes it okay to have those harder conversations and I'll use the term butt heads for want of a better term, but in a way that's yeah, complements the organization and enables that, but without it being toxic or stressful. So is that the trick here? Is that like the not the trick,
Yeah,
but the
Michelle, spot
challenge?
on. Because if you think about conflict that's appropriately resolved, it's actually a key way of building trust in relationships because it says you and I can disagree about something, but we're going to navigate this together and come out the other end. And that is actually a foundation for building trust in a relationship. So it's not so much, I wouldn't use the word dissent so much as disagreement or diversity of views. And in teams where people feel safe to disagree, I think that goes to what you were talking about, but that's part of the culture and a tolerance for taking risks, fallibility, trying new things where you're not personally penalised for doing
Having an
so.
opinion or something that's different to someone else's, or yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
and being respectful, I guess, in the way you communicate that in those, sort of conversations or
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I
okay.
think they refer to it in the psychological safety terms as healthy dissent. They refer to it as. Tim, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the metrics with the red and the green, and I've used the watermelon analogy quite often in the past, especially in mining. But one of the other things with the readings I've and podcasts I've listened to and books and stuff is I think it was Todd Conklin that said, "Fear the green and embrace the red."
Yep.
And I quite often use that because don't be afraid to see red.
Mm.
Because it actually opens up a better discussion when you can sort of like have that conversation with the people doing the work. It's okay to still have things when you're doing a risk matrix, for example, and you're doing a risk assessment, and so it's okay to still have a risky part of that work at high level. But what are your controls? But it's about having those discussions. And when I'm giving the reports to leadership, they freak out sometimes when they see red. And I said, well, no, that's okay, because then we're seeing where we can improve.
Yeah.
And it's actually people starting to report the brittleness of the system,
Yeah.
so we can make those improvements. And you as leaders are the ones in control of that.
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? You can't fix what you don't know is broken, right? Or that's got an issue. So yeah, that's a really good call out. Thank you.
I think Clive Lloyd says you can't fix a secret.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Hey, Sam, can you share some early warning signs leaders should watch for in themselves and in their teams?
Yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, let's sort of break it into
Mm,
leaders and their teams, because a dysregulated leader under chronic stress, if their fight flight's on, it's going to do a whole bunch of bad things. So obviously your decision making capability isn't going to be fantastic, because being in chronic stress and fight flight on impairs your cognitive function. You're likely to be more emotionally dysregulated, so more irritable. You're likely to be more fatigued, and have decision paralysis. So I guess from a leader's point of view, it's about knowing yourself and your early warning signs, because your team are watching you in a genuinely stalker kind of way.
mm,
They're watching what you say and watching what you do all the time. And if you're modeling this reactivity, I call it crisis culture or chaos culture,
mm,
where everything's urgent, that's going to bleed into the team. I think for teams, it's silence in meetings, clicks, things like rising sick leave, which might have other causes, but just as a potential warning sign, blame, defensiveness, gossip. And then I guess leaders need to be aware it's not the one big thing, it's subtle breaches of trust that accumulate over time. They kind of layer that then end up in a culture of fear. So I kind of see those red flags not so much as performance issues as safety issues. Things like body language, eye rolls, that sort of negative body language, interruptions, dismissive comments, all those small signs kind of add up together to be early warning signs to watch.
yeah, that's really interesting. And that kind of segues into my next question for you, Megan, around what role do micro habits play in sustaining this safe, high-performing teams over time?
Yeah, it's another good question. Thanks for giving me the good ones here. Uh,
Anytime.
yeah, I don't know what others here think about micro habits. To me, what they are small compounding activities that one performs, and then sometimes they take a very small amount of time, sometimes they take a little bit longer. But then when one keeps performing them, they compound and add to one another to receive or obtain ultimately a positive outcome, hopefully, or a certain type of outcome at least. And so, you often hear people talking about micro habits as maybe being drinking your water or, getting a certain amount of sleep or certain other things like that. But the thing about them is that they release dopamine as well. And so, that feels good. And I know, when Sam teaches us about some of this chemistry, you think about how when you're releasing dopamine, so that's something that feels good as well. So for high performing teams, with micro habits, if individuals can actually be stacking those micro habits together, what it leads to is this way of them operating that they then come into the high performing team in a way that they are regulated and that they are able to absorb what is happening in that meeting or with the interaction with others in a way that they can bring their best self forward. So,
Mm,
I often think about things as energy and, how much energy it takes to do something. But if you can think about those micro habits that you have yourself or perhaps teammates that you understand that they have, then when they actually get into the meeting or are working on the projects, they're already at this state where they can openly hear feedback, where they can talk to one another about the challenges of the project or what's going on, and they actually can move things forward as a team, and they're able to also share that feedback with one another.
yeah, that's great. Thank you. And it kind of, I guess, leads into another question that I have around what's one unsafe habit that leaders often overlook that erodes trust, because we actually see a lot of this in the work that we do, is that there are things that leaders will overlook often. And I mean, I know for myself, one of the things that I see a lot in teams that gets overlooked by leaders because they don't often love having the courageous or challenging or difficult conversations that they're all called is pulling up the bad behavior when it happens rather than letting it fester and fester. Because what's happening is the team are sitting around watching the leader, expecting the leader to act, and they don't. And so that little habit becomes a bigger problem, to the point where if you've got a high performer watching underperformers, as an example, get away with bad behavior, they'll vote with their feet first and they'll leave and go and get another job at another organisation because they're sick of tolerating that poor behaviour. So I don't know, Sam or Megan, are there any other unsafe habits? How long have we got? Is that what you're about?
I've got a little list that I came up with, racking my brains this morning. So mistaking silence for agreement, micromanaging and being a total control freak, which is something I know I've got to be aware of as a toxic trait, broken promises, public criticism and blame, favoritism and unfairness or perceived, I mean, that's a perception as much as a reality, overemphasis on results, ignoring well-being, or even worse, overemphasis on results and token gestures towards well-being. You know, hashtag no more cupcakes. That was my little list.
We had cupcakes in here yesterday, and I think they're in
Oh,
here.
I love cupcakes, but not when it's the only well-being gesture.
Yeah, like an
people
Are You
get.
Okay Day. I don't know how many people, show of hands, that saw Are You Okay cupcakes in their office on Are You Okay Day.
I got asked, I counted, Kristen, 10 times to do a free talk for Are You OK Day for companies this year.
That's
And
scary.
that's the only time of year. And they literally were going to do the 15-minute wellbeing toolkit and cupcakes. And I said no.
I just saw Lucy and her colleagues sitting there cracking up laughing. They're probably looking at each other going, we did that. We actually had the yellow cupcakes.
That's okay, as long as it's not the only thing one day a year.
We did not do Are You
No.
OK Day. We have a weekly, let's say, a breakfast where things are being brought by different people. Today was some sort of pistachio things, which were not bad at all, but we are used to a massive load because our cook is brilliant baker. Today he brought like 10 or 12, which, you know, we are a small team, but this is like, as you know, it is less than 1/10 of what he usually brings. So the disappointment was certainly there. I'm not sure whether it had impact on the trust in him.
He is an asset to your team.
Did not help. Did not help.
You're based in Adelaide. We're happy for an invite anytime.
Welcome every Wednesday around 10 o'clock.
Fantastic. Anything you can think of, Megan, from an unsafe habit that leaders do?
By the way, I just want to chip in that pistachio stuff sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Ship me some, please. Just kidding. And maybe it's the anti, so maybe it's not necessarily the unsafe, but maybe there's this thing that we can talk about, which is what leaders can do to support, you know, and I think the biggest thing here is for leaders to listen and to hear what folks have to say, you know, and listening looks and sounds different to different people. You know, sometimes it is the active listening, sometimes it's, you know, just taking a step back and having people able to actually give their point of view about stuff. And then the other thing I was thinking, and again, it's really just the anti of what you're talking about, is the ability to take feedback. So, you know, people, in my experience, many organizations encourage us to be able to both give and to receive feedback. And, you know, it's important to be able to do that in a way that is supportive of people so that they don't feel like they're being attacked or that perhaps their opportunities are being called out in front of other folks. So they're probably my biggest two from a practitioner's point of view, you know, around listening and feedback.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Sam, I noticed that we've got the SCARF model up. Do you want to talk a little bit about how this relates to psychosocial safety? Because we're obviously doing a lot of work in this space.
Yes. So this is David Rock's model, and it's neuro leadership fundamentals. So there's 5 key areas. And effectively, what the SCARF model is saying is that the brain treats social threats and rewards with the same urgency as physical threats. So we're driven, all of us, to minimize threat, move away from threat, and to move towards reward, to maximize reward. So leaders need to think about these 5 key areas. So status, people needing to feel valued, not diminished. Certainty is clarity around stress, because that actually frees up our brain if we're not under stress to be innovative and creative. Autonomy, relatedness, so connectedness, and builds trust and releases oxytocin. And then fairness. So that's not just transparent processes, it's also this idea of bad behaviour being dealt with and a sense of equity and, you know, fairness in the process. So I had a cute little video I wanted to try and show you to show how deep core this biological need is for fairness in our workforce. So this is an experiment with little monkeys, and they're being given either cucumber, which they don't like, or grapes, which they really do like, and see what the monkey does.
Getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task, and we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us, and that's what she does. And she gets a grape, and she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
We've all been that monkey, right?
Oh, that is, I love the fact.
It's great, but it just shows how deep that biology is, the need for fairness and equity, and the perception of fairness and equity. So if leaders can think about those 5 elements, basically it'll not just help teams feel safer, but from a neurological point of view, but also perform better, because they're not mutually exclusive, right? Safety is the gateway to performance. It's not a impediment to performance.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. I love
It's good.
that. Do you have any comments on that one at all, Megan? I love that video, and it's so funny. I think that we can relate humans so closely to monkeys, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I thought it was a great video. And you know what it reminds me of is in a workplace context or a workplace setting where some folks do seem to receive, say, the positive feedback and then others don't. And then you can see in the room, you know, what happens with folks and how they react. And, you know, maybe they slink down there in their chair a little bit, or perhaps someone does speak up with an idea. But if another person speaks over the top of them or diminishes what they're saying, again, you can see from that person how they're reacting and whether what they're going to do going forward as well. I've never seen that video before. I love it because I didn't know that monkeys didn't like cucumbers and that they'd love grapes so much. And the little tantrum throwing the cucumber out, clearly they don't like it. And perhaps in the workplace context, some people are a little more restrained, let's call it, but then others do respond like they're throwing the cucumber away as well, aren't they? You know, just not happy with the way things are going, and that's when certain responses become a little less tolerable in the work context as well.
And I think the interesting thing is also when you think about the favoritism, it's really interesting to think through policies and procedures around how do we make sure that organisations are really establishing clear guidelines around measures, because quite often we go into organisations and there is this unfairness, and the challenge that we see is often people aren't clear on how they measure success and how they measure their own performance. And it's one of those things that we quite often walk in and say, one of the first questions I'll ask is, how do you know that you've been successful at the end of every week? And the amount of times I hear from people saying, I actually have no idea. And when we think about the 17 hazards that we've got over here with our model code of practice under psychosocial, one of them is around job clarity. And so if we're not clear with our people around how they even measure this stuff, we're already failing them, which then can sit up that predisposition for unfairness at the same time. So I think we just need to be really mindful of that for any of those people that are in roles where they can help influence our policies and procedures within organisations to make sure that there are really clear measures for us. I don't know whether either of you want to comment on that, or anyone actually wants to come off and comment on that.
I was just thinking about this idea of performance, Kristen, and I've got this really strong view that we need to shift away from it being just delivering the technical bit of the job, and then recruiting and promoting based on that. So I kind of would like us to frame performance as also co-regulation, literally from a biological point of view, where we're modeling, emotional regulation and professional conduct, and how we behave at work and treat other people is equally as important as the technical skills delivery. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but I would take the average performer with the fantastic attitude over the amazing technical terrible attitude any day of the week.
Yep, me too. And I think probably all of us would really, wouldn't we? Yeah. I'm mindful of time. We've got 5 minutes left. So I'm going to ask a question and then I'm going to open up to the floor to see if anyone has any burning questions that they'd like to ask anyone whilst you have us as a captive audience. If you could, and this is for both, if you could teach every leader one daily practice to strengthen trust, what would it be?
Am I going first?
Go,
Yes,
Megan.
Sam?
Yeah, go.
For me, it's about, as a leader, understanding who is in your team and understanding them as people. Because my belief is that when you understand who the person is, what drives them, what's happening in their life, what their goals are, what their values are, and when you get to know someone as a person, you can really relate to them on that human level. And, I know that your company is called Human, which I think is the most amazing title. And I didn't say that because of that, but it's really just out of this experience of what it's like, when people feel understood and when they feel heard. And part of that is understanding who the person is. So for me, that's probably one of the key parts here. One thing I would say, though, is that it's not always easy, because sometimes perhaps people don't want to reveal a part about themselves, or they feel like they need to have a certain mask or a way that they're presenting themselves. So I do believe it's up to all of us to, ask those curious questions about one another, get to learn one another, and see what one another's superpowers are, so that we can also enhance those in the work setting as well.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Sam, anything from you?
I sort of dumped it all into some of the slides that have been up on the screen, but I guess it would be thinking about how you consciously use your time at work, and viewing investing time in people as a much heavier weighting than actually doing the hands-on job. It sometimes doesn't feel like the same sort of achievement because you're not ticking things off your to-do list in the same way, but the kind of micro habits that build trust, I think humanity is right on the top of my list, which is really what Megan was saying, I think. So care, acknowledging effort, and normalizing fallibility, that's okay. And I was with a leader of a university yesterday, going through a lot of change. And she said, we've been saying to our teams, we don't know. We're kind of doing this together. We don't have all the answers. We're not the experts on everything. But I've got your back, and it's going to be okay because we're going to do this together. And I think that was spot on for me. So that would be my one.
Yeah, I was going to use one word, and that was get curious. curiosity. I think as leaders, the more curious we are about all sorts of things, people don't turn up every day to work to do a rubbish job. Most of us don't turn up every day to do that. So if something is going on for you humans in your team, it's to understand and get curious around what's going on, and especially if it's really abnormal for the person. I think that's really crucial, that we don't take this stuff personally, but just start to really understand what's driving some of this stuff that actually sits in behind what's going on for your people in your teams. Because you know what, we've all got a story, we've all got stuff that goes on. And so how do we as leaders use two of these and one of these for, in that order? I think we were given them in that number for a reason. Yeah. Does anyone have any last burning questions they would like to ask Megan or Sam before we finish off for today? That 45 minutes has gone like a hot minute. But any questions? Anyone feel free to come off and ask before we have to go and let you back to your jobs for the day. No? Okay. So thank you so much for joining us and spending your lunch break with us today. Sam's just popped some further information up around what psychosocial safety looks like. We'll be sharing out this video as well. We've got a heap of resources on our website. Feel free to reach out to us if you've got any questions or need anything or need any support. We're only too happy to help you. But yes, we'd like to say thank you for spending the time. And I'd also like to say a massive thank you to Megan for spending some time with us in your evening over in Seattle. It's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to have you as part of our webinar today. And we're very, very grateful and can't wait to see you in Australia sometime very, very soon.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. Appreciate being with you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the week and speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. See ya.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.